And Tohid Asadi is standing by there for us. Tohid, so Donald Trump making some remarks in his speech about Iran, where he criticized Iran, accusing it of trying to tear down the region and funding bloodshed abroad. But then he said, I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I will be very happy. How do you think those comments of Donald Trump's are going to go down in Tehran, especially given that we are in the middle of negotiation when it comes to a nuclear deal?
Yes, exactly. It happens in terms of timing at a very critically important situation. So far, we haven't had any reaction from Iranian officials on the very latest statements that we heard from the U.S. President Donald Trump. But for Iranian side, it would be like dancing with the same old tune, as they are used to receiving and hearing such kind of rhetoric in which we see a very clear voice of hostility. And this is part of the rhetoric and discourse that we have been hearing, we have been following over the past 4 decades. So it's not going to be that much new to hear statements like Iran being called as a source of destruction in the region. On the other hand, we know that Iranians are stating almost the same argument when it comes to the U.S. interventions in the West Asia. This is a sort of back and forth rhetoric that we hear, but it's still something that is obviously very important is that it happens just only after we had the fourth round of indirect talks between Iran and the United States, aiming at lifting of sanctions for Iranians on the one hand and dealing with the concerns regarding Iran's nuclear program on the other hand. So we know that there is a next round of talks down the road. The Iranian foreign minister, after the last round of talks finished, said that it's going to be in a week or so. So it happens on a context of talks between the two sides. Iranians, and specifically Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, recently mentioned that for us, what matters is not the statements that we hear from American officials in the public, but the critically important aspect of the talks is the thing that happens behind the closed doors. So the basis for talks to be continued is going to be the, let's say, content that is being exchanged during the talks, not in public statements. But all in all, what we can see is a mixture of different sentiments. On the one hand, we see clear threats directed by the United States and President Trump in particular. And this is not something new. He has been constantly sending threatening military threats against Iran, something that Iranians are not really interested in and they do not really like. And on the other hand, he is talking about the possibility of peace and possibility of obtaining a deal at the end of the day. So it is highly dependent on how the trajectory of diplomatic affairs is going to take place in the next couple of weeks. But still, these kind of statements could put a certain amount of impact on the entire pathway of the talks that we are experiencing at the time being.
And Tohid, I want to ask also about Syria and what Donald Trump had to say about Syria and the lifting of sanctions there. Obviously, Syria, well, Bashar al-Assad, who has now been overthrown, was a big ally of Iran. And of course, Iran itself would like sanctions lifted. But here we have Syria essentially now having its sanctions lifted by the US.
Well, actually, first and foremost, we need to pay close attention to the fact that Iran is dynamically reassessing its positions in respect of the geostrategic developments in the West Asia and developments in Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere is actually part of that big calculation based upon which this reassessment is taking place in Iran. This is one point. The second point is that sanction is a big issue not only for Iran, but also in Syria, but also in Russia. And this is just a pathway for Iranians to build up new strategic partnerships. For instance, look at what takes place between Iran and Russia. They're trying to establish this improved nature of ties, economically speaking, to deal with the sanctions on the one hand. And Iran is saying, to deal with that issue of sanctions, it's trying to, let's say, widen the spectrum of its economic ties, including within the framework of BRICS, Shanghai Organization, or other mechanisms by which it can sort of go beyond these sanctions or circumvent these sanctions indeed. But all in all, we see a multilateral trajectory of attempts in Tehran. On the one hand, they're trying to lift the sanctions through the negotiations with the West, through the negotiations with the European Union, through the negotiations with the Americans, with the United States in particular, in a sort of indirect way. And at the same time, they're focusing on other mechanisms. So if you look at in the past days, the foreign policy of the country, regionally speaking, you can see a lot of development. They have been trying to improve their ties with Saudi Arabia. A sort of conventional regional competition was there, and now we see this development in different aspects of Iran's regional foreign policy.
Many thanks for that. Tohid Asadi there for us in Tehran.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.